Good evening and welcome to Eye on Piscataway. My guest tonight is United States Representative Frank Palone. Representative Palone represents New Jersey's 6th Congressional District, which covers most of Middlesex County, as well as the Bayshore and oceanfront areas of Monmouth County. On January 3rd, 2019, Representative Palone was sworn in for his 16th full term in the United States House of Representatives. And welcome to our show, Congressman Palone. Thank you for stopping by Eye on Piscataway once again, Congressman Palone. And I know with your busy schedule, with everything going on back in the district, as well as in Washington, you represented us down in Washington, D.C., and taking the time out to ask some questions that residents may have about with everything that's going on, not just here in New Jersey and in the district, but more importantly in the world as a whole, affecting a lot of residents throughout this country of ours. So I think I have some questions for you to ask, and I know you're well versed in these questions, hopefully. Before I ask my first question, I want to thank you for your leadership on the very issues now before our town and our state and our nation. Of special note, a thank you for your many efforts to deliver more health care insurance to our residents and to more Americans under the Affordable Care Act over the last several years. And having more of us insured has been a lifeline to a lot of people during this pandemic. As the chairman of a key House committee that leads these issues, would you share with you some of your views on the adjustments that are now needed for the landmark law, especially now during the COVID-19 impacts and notably the loss of health insurance? I think just recently, as of today, there was an article where I think 6 million people have now lost their health insurance nationwide because of the economics. And now it appears that the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is going to be a potential lifeline for them. So maybe you might want to delve into that for a few minutes.
This is kind of multifaceted. I'll try to be brief. First of all, I want you to understand that, I want everyone to understand that with regard to COVID, I would like to see anybody who has to have a test, a treatment, drugs, or eventually the vaccine related to the COVID-19 or coronavirus, that should be free. It should be covered by your insurance. There shouldn't be any copay. There shouldn't be any deductible. Now, we were able to do that with the CARES Act, which the president signed into law with regard to the testing. But we still have not gotten that through with regard to the treatment, the drugs, and the eventual vaccine. But we're working on it. That was in the HEROES Act that passed the House, and we're hoping that gets taken up by the Senate and eventually gets supported by the president.
So that was part of the second funding phase that was done
Yes.
down for Washington.
Right. In other words, the first phase guaranteed that the testing was free. And when I say free, if you don't have insurance, it's covered. If you have insurance, the insurance company has to pay for it, and there's no copay or no deductible. But we like to see the whole thing, right? And that was in the bill that passed the House that I was involved with, but it hasn't passed the Senate. But we're still hoping we go back into session next week that we can get that done. But separate and apart from that, a lot of people, remember, the majority of people in the United States get their health insurance through their job, not through Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was basically designed to deal with people on the individual marketplace who didn't get insurance on the job, right?
So that's for folks in the viewership, for those folks who may be sole proprietors or self-employed.
Right, exactly. And so what's happening is, as people get laid off, furloughed, or whatever, a lot of them have lost their job, and therefore they lost their health insurance, which is exactly the numbers that you gave before. What would you say?
So around almost 6 million.
Right. So those are the people that had their health insurance linked to the job. Now they lost their job. They may go back, they may not, but they've already lost their health insurance. Okay. So now those people need to go on the individual market where Obamacare or Affordable Care Act, same thing is, and buy the insurance. Well, part of it is, can they do that? Well, it says in the Affordable Care Act that you can, if you lose your job, you don't have to have the once-a-year enrollment period, which is like in November, December. You can access it right away. But then you also have to have the money, right? In other words, it's not free, although it's heavily subsidized, right? So depending on your income, and of course, if your income goes very low, you might even be eligible for Medicaid, right? Which is for people who are very low income. They might be eligible for Medicaid and should apply for Medicaid if they have no income or very little, or they might have some income and they want to go buy an insurance policy through Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. But so what we're trying to do, we passed this ACA Enhancement Act a couple of weeks ago, again in the House, trying to get it passed in the Senate, that basically addresses that problem, but also addresses the fact that we know that with all the money that the health insurance companies are paying out for COVID, and the loss of revenue that hospitals and other doctors are facing, that insurance premiums are going to go up, right? So what we did with and that would matter whether you're buying it and you have it or you want to buy it new, right? So what we did in this ACA Enhancement Act that we passed a couple of weeks ago in the House, but still has to go through the Senate, is we said we recognize that. We also recognize that Trump is trying to sell these junk plans, like that don't cover things. He's letting states, not New Jersey, so I'm not going to dwell on it, sell junk plans. So when I say junk, I mean it doesn't cover hospitalization, it doesn't cover maternal care, but you can't do that in our state, so it's not really relevant here. In any case, this bill says really provides a lot more of a subsidy to pay for health premiums because we know that they're going to go up. It makes it possible for people, regardless of, without having to do much paperwork or fill out many forms, to immediately be able to apply for the ACA if they lost their job. And it also guarantees that the plans are good plans, that they can't sell these junk insurance policies anymore. There's a lot more to it, but that's basically what it is.
Well, I think it's fair to say that there are those. It potentially could get worse. I mean,
Sure.
we know what's going on economically currently, though. Through the CARES Act, it did give a lifeline to some of the businesses that if they kept people employed during the COVID up until I think July 31st of this summer, that they would get forgivable loans. But what happens if that runs out? And that the economics of dependent upon what type of business you may be employed by or in goes financially south, and then you may be looking at a substantially more millions of people without health care coverage nationally.
And what I want to stress to you is, and I know it gets confusing, but the HEROES Act, which is the House passed bill, which we're waiting to see what the Senate's going to do. Now, we're going to go back for the next 2 or possibly 3 weeks in session, right? And the idea is McConnell, who's the Senate Majority Leader, and the President at one time said they didn't want to do another COVID bill like HEROES, but now they seem amenable to it. Now, how far
could it be that they may be amenable because now a good chunk of the entire country now, and not just the Northeast, it's the rest of the country now that's in medical crisis mode?
Well, sure. And of course, you get the politics of it. It's places like Florida, Arizona, Texas, which, is important to them politically. So what I want you to know is that this HEROES Act, or what hopefully we're going to do next week, and we work this out with the Senate and the President, is basically going to be another round of everything, Mayor. So in other words, for a while, Trump and McConnell were saying, this is over, COVID's going away, economy's getting better. But I think now they recognize that that's not true. Even they may not admit it, but I think they're starting to recognize it. And so think of this next few weeks and this HEROES Act or whatever as another round of everything. In other words, another round of the small business loans that you mentioned. Another round of unemployment at this 600 per week.
Let's get that thought about unemployment. There's been comments made in national news by members of the administration feeling that, they made a mistake by getting enhanced unemployment benefits because it made people lazy or people maybe should just look for a different job altogether. I mean, that's the comments that are coming out. Right.
See, I don't buy that. I think what's happened, well, first of all, people need the money, and many of them can't go back to work, right? Because the restaurants,
they're still closed. Businesses are still closed.
Right, exactly. But beyond that, I think that the hesitancy to go back to work, I don't know that there is much if the opportunity is there, but if there is any, it's because of the virus, right? In other words, I don't buy this thing that people are just sitting around, don't want to do anything. But a lot of them are afraid because they're afraid that the conditions to go back to work are not ideal. See, I think so. That's part of it more than anything. But in any case, that's what we're trying to do now. In addition to that, this also has another round of the cash payments. Remember, got cash.
It
But
was the
most
$1,200 per
right, so
people
it
that
has another round of
qualified.
that. But most important, from your perspective, is a much more robust round of money to the states and the counties, and now to the towns because of revenue loss. Now, I don't want to. If you don't have to get into that, but I assume that you've had some major
That's
revenue.
true, and I just want to let the folks, I on Piscataway, and then anybody else in the state that may be watching this segment, is that I don't think people understand that there is a economic issue going on now with towns and cities and counties throughout the country, but the true effects of the economics of this won't be felt until 18 months later, because that's when the tax appeals start rolling through and start getting adjudicated. And it's no different than what happened during the 2000 dot-com bust and the 2008 crash of the financial crash, that the true effect of the economics wasn't felt until 18 months to 24 months later, because there is a lag time of all these things that transpired. So, although, there may be some potential revenue to help a stopgap measure for towns and cities across the country, it may have to be an ongoing issue because it may take up to 2 years to stop the hemorrhaging financially of the towns and cities. I mean, you can only lay off and furlough so many people, but you still have to have, at the local level, you still produce services that people rely on in times of a crisis. We're
And
not
the
like a
last thing you
business.
want to do in Piscataway or in Middlesex County or in the state is start furloughing people.
Yeah.
Like a best example to me, because I used to be a city councilman, is that you have like your anticipated revenues. So
Yeah,
like in other words, when you do your budget, you anticipate you're going to collect 96%. I don't know
that's
what it
good.
is. All right. Oh, which means that 4% of the people aren't going to pay. So then, your tax bill relates to what you can anticipate. So if you find at the end of the year that I can only anticipate 90% because 10% of the people aren't going to pay, then that increases your costs and your taxes, right? I mean, that's just one example, right? But that doesn't happen right away. That happens in the next year or the year
That's
after.
correct. And the
Anticipate.
witching hour for a lot of communities is not only towards the end of this year, 2020, but the real problem is going to be moving forward January 1st of 2021, when you have a new budget, assuming that you're on a calendar year basis. And that's when everything becomes problematic. And that's why a lot of tough decisions are going to have to be made in the fourth quarter of 2020, because when you move into January 1st, any decisions that you forestall, it only makes things worse for the next year financially. But, at the end of
Right.
the day is that we need, we look at, like, for instance, our town, many towns have the hotel tax that has cratered the travel industries in a precarious.
Construction fees, right? You
Yeah,
probably don't
that's
have much
correct. I mean, you
construction
don't know,
fees.
like, for instance, in this area, now that Rutgers has said that they're going to have most of their classes online, that means you're not going to have 10,000 students on our side of the river, or the other 10,000 on the New Brunswick side, not patronizing the businesses in this area, or the families coming in for games and this, that, and the other thing, hotels. So it has a cascading effects
Sure.
financially that most people don't necessarily take a look at. But we, as local officials, and as you as a congressman, understand that it's all interconnected. So if you have one leg of the stool of the four legs go down, it starts reverberating on the rest of the functions of the local government, especially financially.
And that's the biggest conflict between the Democrats and the
Yeah,
Republicans in the Northeast and the
yeah.
Southwest or whatever, because we feel we need a robust direct aid, not only to the state, which is the hardest hit, uh, but also to the counties and to the towns,
Yeah.
because in the last round in CARES, the state got money in Middlesex County, but the towns didn't get anything.
Now the towns didn't get, not there wasn't one town in the state that qualified.
Right. So under this, for example, I looked it up just because I knew it was going to be on your show. I think it's like $28 million that would go to Piscataway if HEROES Act passed over the
That's
next couple
correct.
of years.
And that's
Uh,
running in tandem with Senator Menendez, is what he has sponsored on the Senate side.
right, right. So we'll see. In all honesty, I don't think that McConnell and Trump will go along with that level.
Yeah.
Even if it was half of that, it would be helpful, you know. So we'll see over the next few weeks where we're going with that. But
Well, it's
that's
interesting. If you think about it, like there was no city or town in the state of New Jersey that received direct funding. The city of Atlanta, Georgia, which is the largest city in the state of Georgia, didn't receive funding because they're not at 500,000. So, which is very interesting, you know. So there was, I think, only 30 plus cities in the entire
right,
United
because they
States.
weren't looking at metropolitan areas,
Yeah,
just the actual confines of the city
yeah,
itself. That's why a place like Atlanta, because it's all suburban.
yeah.
But any case, so I wanted to mention that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, because you know, I always take pride in the fact that this energy efficiency
Well,
block
we're going to
grant.
get to that. Let me ask
We
you a
want to
couple
get to
more
that? All
questions.
right, I want to
We're going to
talk
get to
about
that.
that because
So
it's in the other bill.
that's question number 4.
All
Well,
right, all right.
related to the leadership, back in December, yourself, Congressman Malinowski, and Congressman Payne stopped by the Piscataway Senior Center to talk about prescription drugs, and you had some legislation that you introduced about prescription drugs, and maybe you could talk a little further about that.
Well, what we did actually is we repassed that as part of the ACA Enhancement Act and used the revenue in part to pay for the subsidies for health insurance, right?
Okay.
So, in other words, back in December or January, we passed my bill that would require the federal government to negotiate prices for prescription drugs. This is what every developed countries, all the European.
And for quickest, Canada up north from us does that on a regular basis.
Canada, Australia, France, Germany, UK, Japan, all the Western European countries, they all have negotiated prices for prescription drugs, and it brings the cost down over 50%. Sometimes it's, you know, 20, they pay 20 per 30% of what we pay here. And so that passed, but you know, the Senate didn't take it up. When we did the AC, what we're trying to do is it saves the government a lot of money, which can then be used for things like, you know, paying for the extra subsidies for people who buy health insurance through Obamacare or the ACA, or we also had enough that we wanted to use it to expand Medicare benefits for seniors and the disabled. Remember, like seniors and the disabled under Medicare don't get much in the way of vision care or hearing
Hearing
aids
aids.
or dental care, very important. You can provide a major benefit for all those three with the money that you save, as well as using it to help pay for bigger subsidies to help people pay for the health insurance. So that passed the House again as part of this ACA Enhancement Act. And look, you know, I don't want, I keep saying these things pass, and you know what happens in the Senate with the Republicans or the president. We're still hopeful that we can get the president Republican to support some of these things. As I said with another COVID bill, we're still hoping at some point the president will support you know, this negotiated prices bill, because he has said he wants to do it in the past. And then we'll talk about the infrastructure bill too. So that was that.
Well, they're going to have to do something about that. I mean, because, you know, every night, if you watch television at night, if you have time, you always see a commercial with a woman walking up to a drugstore saying, I don't know if I can afford this. And she walks in, well, I have an RX card. It goes from like $300 down to like $10. And you know what? It's not, that commercial is really not unrealistic, because there's a lot of people in this country actually have to live that. And that is why such yourself and your colleagues in the House that understand that, you know, you in this day and age, it's prescription drugs is not a luxury. It's you need it to live, especially when you get older.
The reality is it becomes in the last 10 or 20 years, Brian, it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of your healthcare budget. You know, whereas 20 years ago, drugs were not a very big part of what you spent on healthcare. Now they're almost the majority. I mean,
well, that's ironic that you brought that up, because I know at the local level and the county level, the rising costs of, you know, for employees' healthcare is not the actual plan itself. It's the actual prescription drugs. And that has become the driving force, you know, right there, of trying to cost containment for the prescription drugs. And if you
So
could,
what we're doing is not only negotiating the price to
yeah,
bring it down, but also saying that it can't be the price that's finally negotiated can't be more than 20% higher than what the average course is for that drug in those five other countries that I mentioned. Like it's called an international price
mm.
index, which is made up, I think, Canada, Japan, France, England. Um, Germany, maybe five of those countries that do negotiated prices.
Now, I have another question. This pandemic has really revealed new challenges for us to address, and you've been at the forefront of these issues. And we just want to talk a few minutes about how we're going to improve. We talked about the prescription drugs and the healthcare, but I also want to mention broadband. As more Americans work from home and more children and others learn from home, we have to make sure that communication systems serve all of us, just not those that can afford the services. And we have gaps in coverage, which means building out these networks in our towns and other places, and we continue to find ways to make these services more affordable. Your committee that you chair down in Washington has jurisdiction over the FCC and issues pertaining to broadband. And I think now more than ever, whether it be Zooming a medical office visit of a senior or a child trying to learn through remote learning in a classroom, or a parent who's working on a phone to keep their job, or video, it has now become paramount that broadband is more important than ever before. And that may be the wave, and we knew it was going to be the wave of the future, but it just put it on steroids to show how there is a digital divide in this country, that you have a large segments of the United States, and particularly in the state of New Jersey, where you have households that don't have access to high-speed broadband, which puts them at a disadvantage both education-wise, medical-wise, and actually job performance-wise, quite frankly. And I think you understand it, and many of your colleagues understand it, but I think there needs officials in Washington need to move the FCC in that direction. That this is not a luxury to have. This is an outright necessity in order to survive.
Well, you're absolutely right. And again, this is many faceted. So let's try to summarize it if you can. I think that the COVID virus has really pointed out the need for people to be able to access the internet because, as you say, I mean, telehealth is a great
Yeah.
example, right? In other words, more and more now. I mean, I had been encouraging telehealth even before. If you remember when I think it was at the Veterans Clinic. You had the new
We have the
Veterans
new veterans.
or they have the
Con-
telehealth, right? So
yes.
we started out with trying to do this at some of the veterans facilities, like the clinics in Middlesex and Monmouth, where we had telehealth. But we wanted to expand it, and there were a lot of limitations on it, like there were limitations in terms of reimbursement rates for the doctors and hospitals. There were limitations, regulatory constraints, you know. So we tried to eliminate most of those in the last few months during this COVID period, but and expand telehealth. But as you say, whether it's looking for a job or it's being able to access online classroom, all this is so important. So what we're trying to do is, I mean, there's so many aspects of it, but one aspect of it, and that we can talk about in the infrastructure bill, I know you're going to get to, is to basically allow broadband connections in parts of the country that are underserved, right?
Mm.
Tends to be rural areas and some inner city areas, right? Not so much in Middlesex or Monmouth counties, to
In
be
the
honest.
state of New Jersey, it's really down in South Jersey, down in the Cumberland, Gloucester, that
Yeah,
area, and then up in the northwest part of the state.
exactly. So there's that, and that's covered in infrastructure. We'll get to that. But then the other issue is people who can't afford it, right? In other words, the broadband connection is there, but they can't afford to connect, either to create or to pay for the connection or to pay for the
Mm.
ongoing fees every month, right? So in both the CARES Act and the HEROES Act, we've expanded that, and we've been trying to get the FCC to do it on its own. So the FCC historically had a fund where schools could connect, right? Getting the schools themselves to
Mhm.
connect. But we now are trying to expand that so that it could be actual the families and households to connect so that they can get the connection from the school. All right. And then also to have a fund like we do with LIHEAP for utility assistance. You know, there's a utility assistance fund. I think it's called LIHEAP
Mhm.
to help people pay for their heat or for their water if they don't have a lot of money or they lost their job. And we're now trying to do the same thing for the internet connection. So it says, let the school connect. Well, the larger issue is
Mhm.
areas of the country that aren't connected at all. That's part of the infrastructure bill, which we're going to talk about. But in CARES and HEROES, we're trying to expand the school's connections and then the kids' connections to the school, and then some means of paying for the bill for people that can't afford the bill.
It's very interesting. Like about 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, I had a long discussion with then Senator Begich of Alaska, and evidently telemedicine has been in use for almost a decade and a half in the state of Alaska because out
Yeah,
of necessity. And it's very interesting now because of now the COVID-19, without going into, you know, long dissertation, the pluses and minuses of it, that this has now come at the forefront because in order for a doctor, a primary care physician, to see one of their patients, they're actually doing video, actually visitation.
exactly. And in Alaska, because they have all these remote areas, particularly amongst American Indians or Inuit,
Indians.
right? So we actually started this, as I said, with some of the federal programs like the veterans, but also with the Indian Health Service, right?
Yeah.
Which exists in Alaska too, because the federal government provides health care for Indians under their treaties. So we tried using it, and it's been very successful. It really has.
Anyway, talking about the FCC, I know one of my pet peeves with the FCC, Congressman, is that the fact that, one of the things, and you could speak to this, is that through the Trump administration's majority on the FCC, they basically they treat local areas, that they have no say in the municipal rights of way or the county rights of way, and that they were going to give a green light for business and industry to do whatever they want in the municipal rights of way in order to, I guess, enhance broadband in general. And
Yeah,
that's not.
I heard you were concerned about that, and I didn't know. I don't know too much about what they've done or what they. Do you know what
Well, basically, with all
are they be
the
considering?
pushing the 4G and the 5G network,
Oh, okay,
Congressman, in
that's
regards to, they want more nodes. They want to pretty
yeah,
much, without getting permission to be on the rights of way, they want to slap everything up on anything and everywhere. And a lot of it's going to be an aesthetics issue. And they're going to actually need more cell tower antennas and more nodes, and they wanted to put them like every 300 or 400 feet. And
yeah,
I can envision a lot of residents saying, "Why are you letting them put this in front of my house up?"
sure. I'll follow up on that, Mayor.
Yeah, and that's a big growing issue that's going on right now. But you do see that through the broadband through the FCC. I think the merging of the Affordable Care Act, and I really think that you're going to see more and more doctors really seeing their patients via remote video. And I don't think people realize that you have a lot of practitioners out there. The reason why hospitals were losing money is not so much the COVID; it's because they pushed all the doctors into dealing with COVID. You couldn't get non-elective surgeries
Exactly.
or anything, any other health-related issues done. And you had an issue where you had the general public that didn't want to show up at the hospitals if they had something seriously ill wrong with them, non-COVID related, because they were concerned they were going to get COVID while they were in the
Right. And
hospital.
that's part of the reason, too, in all honesty, why the telehealth during this crisis has become more widespread because people don't want to go to the hospital. I mean, that is true, unfortunately. But I think it makes sense to expand in general because, again, I go back to the experience with the veterans clinics. I mean, I know that a lot of the veterans really preferred going there rather than have to go to East Orange to the Veterans Hospital.
Mm.
It's a convenience. It's there's so many advantages to it, really.
All right, we're going to get to a little bit about the president was talking at length when he first was elected about infrastructure. We still don't have an infrastructure bill, and here it is 3.5 years later. Beyond broadband infrastructure, you have are leading on the improvement of our water, transportation, energy systems. All these are at the forefront and center for me as mayor and for our residents, as far as I'm concerned, because you need safe drinking water. But I want to take a minute to thank you publicly for your leadership on the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant. Both you and Senator Menendez back in 2010 were at the forefront when President Obama was first elected to push that over the finish line. And, you know, these initiatives invest in our towns and have made our towns more efficient and energy resilient and more energy independent, i.e., like, for instance, the solar array that we have up on our Public Works building saves us 35% every day because of the generation. And had we have more investment through Congress, we have 3 more buildings that we can easily put solar arrays up on to further the savings for the local taxpayers. And that is a big issue. So can you just talk a little bit about the renewable energy, the future of that?
Sure. So as you mentioned, you know, there are 2 things that I'm still trying to get the president to do. One is, you know, his commitment to have negotiated prices for prescription drugs, which we mentioned. And then the other one was a major infrastructure bill. Now, people think of the infrastructure bill primarily as transportation, and it is. The bill that we passed in the House a couple of weeks ago, called the Moving Forward Act, about 50% of it was transportation. And, you know, you and I don't have to tell everybody how important that is. Like Gateway, obviously, we got to get the money for the Gateway Tunnel and improve mass transit and, you know, the whole thing. But the other 50%, much of it were things within my committee's jurisdiction. So it was expanding broadband, as I said, about, I think it was a $1.5 trillion bill, and about $100 billion is for expanding broadband. But there was also major initiatives for safe drinking water, for cleaning up toxic waste sites, brownfield sites.
Which is big in New Jersey,
Right.
unfortunately.
We have more sites than any other state. And actually, Middlesex, I think, has more sites than any other county. It used to. I don't know if it still does. We cleaned up a lot of them. And then it also has a major component for the electricity grid, which is designed to try to address climate change, energy efficiency, energy resiliency. So we tried to put a lot of things that would help reduce greenhouse gases and encourage renewables in this bill as well. And one of those was, I say yours, because you've been pushing it, not only yourself, but through the National Conference of Mayors too, right? This Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, which allows towns to get money and then use it for solar panels like you did on your roof at your public works. Now, when did that exist and when did it expire? Do you know, when did you get them?
Well, it started out, the legislation started in, it was passed in 2006, but was never funded until the stimulus package during 2009.
Oh, the stimulus after the
It was a one-shot deal.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah,
but I mean, there's been legislation authorization, but there was never the appropriation side of it.
And the National Conference of Mayors that you chaired, or you were?
No, I went through the membership committee. I'm one of the advisory board officers of the organization.
Was pushing it, and I know you were pushing it through them. So that's in the bill. That the funding for those efficiency block grants are in the bill.
Which, for those folks that are out there, for those towns 30,000 above, they would get direct funding, and it's formula driven.
Yeah, exactly. But in addition to that, we have all these other things. In other words, in some ways, and that's why I think I was mixing them earlier. In the same ways, you have major areas of the country that have huge ability for wind or solar power, particularly. A lot of it is out west. A lot of it is in Indian country, right? We have all these, and they can't tap it because even if they build the windmills or they build the solar panels, they can't get it to the.
There's no grid out there to get it to go by.
So that's the idea. And it also provides money for ports. So like you remember a couple of weeks ago, maybe it's longer, the governor announced that he was going to build a major port facility in South Jersey for the
offshore wind
and for the turbines and all that kind of stuff. So it also has money to actually, provide the port facilities. The state of New Jersey could use it for that as well. But the idea is to change the way we transmit power and so that we can encourage more renewables, whether it be offshore, onshore wind like we have out west, solar panels, whatever. And people don't realize that, it's not just a question of putting it on your house. It's a question of these major parts of the country or offshore that could generate a lot of this stuff. But you need the transmission, you need the ports, you need the infrastructure essentially to do that.
Which countries of Europe are light years ahead of the United States in that, because they rely on a lot of that already.
Yeah. Well, you see what they have in the European Union, which of course I would like to see here too, but the president denies that climate change even exists, so it's you're not going to get it under him. Is that you have some sort of national plan to get to 100% clean energy, and so you're not relying on fossil fuels. That's what they have in the European Union. By every 5 years or 10 years, they have to meet a new goal so that ultimately they get to, I think, by 2050 in the European Union where they're carbon neutral.
But technology is playing a big part of that also,
Exactly.
to getting to that goal, because the more things become more efficient, the more you get closer to doing that goal.
Exactly. But in addition, this, the whole idea behind this infrastructure bill, Brian, again, goes back to what we said before, which is that, we think that with the recession and the loss of jobs from COVID, we need to stimulate the economy and create jobs. And that's what the infrastructure bill does too.
So your committee also delves with the clean air issues. Pretty much the state of New Jersey's, I guess, would be constitute what they call a non-attainment area, area where the entire state can't meet federal guidelines because a lot of the power generation from the Midwest, the prevailing winds come over to the state of New Jersey. Where do you see the Clean Air Act going at this point, if and when it needs to be reauthorized? I mean, how does that going to impact the state of New Jersey, given the fact of what's going on economically, nationally? Clean energy's in the mix. It's all interwoven together. Do you have a lot of competing interests out there? But ultimately, I think it's safe to say that most people want to be able to breathe clean air.
Well, it's
but it's a question of how you get to that point.
Well, it's interesting because you probably read, or many people read, that during the COVID crisis, the air quality has improved significantly, right?
And they had infrared pictures before and after, like say at Beijing, China, where it was the first time ever you could see it, everything with a satellite where you could never see it before, and parts of the United States also.
Oh, absolutely.
Los Angeles, classic example.
The biggest, starkest contrast, I think, was New Delhi in India.
Yes.
Where, if on a typical day, you can't even see far in front of you, but they could see the stars at night in New Delhi, which hadn't been the case.
But it does lend some credence to some critics to say that more of the environment needs to be changed, because if you have a sudden stop of the economy like that, you see that you are breathing cleaner air in theory, but in the same breath, people need the economy to run because they need money to live.
Well,
and it's a dichotomy of both.
But you can have both. You just have to set goals. Well, first of all, I wanted to mention that, because you mentioned the Clean Air Act. Of course, the president has used this as an opportunity to say, oh, the air is cleaner so we can relax the standards, which is absurd. So that's what he's been doing, relaxing.
You got a little chutzpah there, but that's a whole
relaxing the clean air standards, relaxing the clean water. I mean, I laugh, but it's not. I mean, the New York Times has this list, I think it's in every week or every day, where they point out how he keeps relaxing all the standards, all the environmental standards. The last one was NEPA, which is the basic environmental policy. Like before you build something, you have to do an environmental impact statement. And he's basically saying you don't have to do it anymore, right?
Yeah.
So it's absurd. But what we've done is we try to put together a bill. I have it in my committee called the Clean Future Act. And this is designed to try to achieve 100% clean economy, right? And that has all kinds, it's a draft. We're trying to see, we're not going to be able to pass it in this Congress because the president will oppose it. But, hopefully in the future, we would pass it. And basically it looks at each sector: the industrial sector, the transportation sector, the building sector, and tries to figure out a way of set up standards to get to a clean economy. So, for example, and some of those things were put in the infrastructure bill. So, for example, in the infrastructure bill, we have a national electric charging program, right? So the stations are set up for electric vehicles. Um, and for building materials, it would, say that you have to use certain kinds of building materials. For transportation, it would increase the level of clean fuels, right, and encourage more mass transit. So basically, and then for the power sector, it would say that you have to essentially phase out fossil fuels, particularly coal, and increasingly use renewables. So that's the future, and it can be done without loss of jobs. In fact, I would say that it would create more jobs because all these things create jobs as well. In terms of building, whether it's wind turbines or solar panels or new
Or charging stations, which, by the way, Congressman, we have 6 charging stations at the community center, but we built for 12.
Oh yeah.
So depending on that, we can easily add that in. And interesting enough that we do have residents, even though the building's not officially open yet, that actually come over, park their cars, because we have the supercharging stations that'll charge up their electric cars while they're reading a book.
Oh yeah.
So out in the parking lot. So it's kind of funny.
So at the library or at the new community center?
New community center.
Oh, all right.
So, but we do have an ordinance now on the books that if you're doing an addition in the corporate areas, that you have to add about X amount of charging stations in as far as parking.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
a lot of the corporations that have done additions within the last 18 months now, there's more and more charging stations popping up throughout our community. And I think that was probably part of the limitations on electric cars, because there weren't enough charging stations go to point A to point B to point C.
Yeah.
But now, as that becomes more prevalent with more charging stations, that issue is starting to slowly go away for folks that may want to have electric charging cars.
Yeah. Well, it's great. I mean, all these things really need to be done, and I really want to dispel the idea that if you move away from fossil fuels, that somehow that's going to create job losses. I think that whatever jobs are lost are more than made up for, with the new jobs that are created from some of these new technologies and innovative ways of doing things, frankly.
Well, I think, Congressman, I want to thank you for all your hard work, and for those folks out in the viewership that are partners at the federal level, both Senator Menendez and Senator Booker and yourself, have been working very closely with the local municipalities and as well as county officials during this health crisis, because it has been really a game changer for folks at the local and national level. And the playbook's being written as we speak, and that there's nothing a book that we can open up. So let's go to this issue now. There's issues that are cropping up every day that you see at the national level, we see at the local level, and that both the staffs of both the town hall and your staff there have been very helpful to us to try to meet these challenges in order to help local residents out. Absolutely. And I think that's and that's the way it should be. That we need to work cohesively in order to try to get things done for the residents of the community, not just Piscataway, but Middlesex County and Monmouth County and the state of New Jersey as a whole.
All right, no, I agree, and Middlesex in particular. I have to say that Middlesex County has really been out front on so many of these things, and works together to bring the towns and the state and the federal together when we have to do projects. So you're absolutely right.
So thank you for stopping by on Piscataway, and I can't thank you enough, and we look forward to seeing you at the ribbon cutting in the community center, and you can even bring your bathing suit if you want.
No,
There's chlorine in the pool. As long as we get the okay from the governor that everybody can go in the pool. So you have to pick up and call Governor Murphy to see if you can go in the pool or not. So.
Right. Well, thank you, Mayor. Thanks so much, and stay well.
They're telling me now it's in the back studio that it's now time for a series of video segments. So first up is the Piscataway Elks Day flag ceremony. This is a very interesting year for Flag Day raising. We have a pandemic going on. We have a national economy that's shattered from the pandemic, and then we have protests throughout the country. And one good thing, for better or worse, in this country is that the flag means democracy, that you can go out and protest about the wrongs and the rights of our great country. No other place in the world can you do that.
The purpose of this service is to honor our country's flag, to celebrate the anniversary of its birth, and to recall the achievements attained beneath its folds. It is quite appropriate that such a service should be held by the Order of Elks, in order of an organization that is distinctly American, intensely patriotic, and without counterpart.
In 1775, the pine flag was adopted for all colonial vessels. The Southern colonials from 1776 to 1777 used the snake flag.
In the latter part of 1775, the Continental Congress appointed a committee to consider the question of a single flag for the 13 colonies. The Congress, on June 14, 1777, provided that the flag of the United States be 13 stripes of alternating red and white, and that the Union be 13 stars, white on a blue field, representing a new constellation. The original 13 stars and stripes represented the original 13 colonies. In 1795, 2 additional stars and stripes were added to represent Vermont and Kentucky.
And after July 4th, 1818, the number of stripes should be 13, and that the blue field should carry 1 star of 20 states in the Union, and that the new stars should be added each state thereafter omitted. On July 4th, 1959, a star was added for Alaska, and a year later, Hawaii added a 50th star. Our present flag, 50 stars and 13 stripes, is accompanied by the POW MIA flag to recognize the plight and demise of a special group of our armed forces, those who are prisoners of war or still remaining missing in action.
Our flag is at once a history, a declaration, and a prophecy. It represents the American nation as it was at its birth. It speaks for what it is today, and it holds the opportunity for the future to add out other stars to the glorious constellation. The Benevolent and Protective Order of Elks is the first and only fraternal body to require formal observance of Flag Day. In July of 1908, the Grand Lodge of this order at Dallas, Texas, then assembled, provided for the annual nationwide observance of Flag Day on the 14th of June in each year, by making it mandatory under each subordinate lodge of the order.
It's not the symbol of the 50 stars, it's what the entirety of the flag means to all of us in this country. And so we want to make sure that while there may be disagreements of what people do and say in this country, it has allowed us to say that. And that's the key, is to be able to voice your opinions in there. So I want to once again thank the Elks for all the hard work you've done. Well, as you can see out here on Wickley and Zirkle, the county engineering department, in conjunction with the Piscataway engineering department, we're busy rebuilding Zirkle Avenue, as well as a county culvert project. We're expecting to hopefully have that finished by early spring of next year. This is a monumental project out here. It's about a $3 million project. You know, for those folks out there that say that want all the roads in town fixed at once, it could be quite costly. This is a local aid project through the Department of Transportation with Piscataway Township. The reconstruction of Morris Avenue, which, by the way, the road was originally reconstructed in 1990, and now it's 30 years later, and it's due for one. This is Kroger Lane over by the Greek Church off of River Road. This is a full-blown reconstruction out there now, curbs and sidewalks to tie into River Road, where they already have existing sidewalks out there.
Okay, first I want to welcome everybody to the 2020 baseball season. We finally started this week. We started on Tuesday. We're going to go through the middle of August. We have 9 teams. We have 4 Teeball teams, 3 minor, 2 major. We play like Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, no weekends. And as you can see, They're all having a ball up here. They're having a great time. And we're also following the COVID guidelines. Our concession stand is closed. We only have one bathroom open. Before we started the season, we had a meeting with our coaches, and we strictly enforcing the CDC guidelines. Coaches have to wear masks when they're talking to their players. As you can see, we closed the dugouts, and the players use the bleachers for the dugouts where they could, stay 6 feet apart. And as far as Teeball goes, they line up along the fence when they're on the offensive side of the game. And as far as our season goes, we are also going to put an 11-12 district team out there. District 10 is running a tournament. So I am entering our 11 and 12s, which will start the second week in August, and we are done by Labor Day. And on another note, I want everybody to know that our Pop Warner season is going to start. We have signups. You need to go on the Piscataway Recreation site. We have Mighty Mites, Junior Pee-wees, and Pee-wees. Our Mighty Mite and Junior Pee-wee squads are almost full, so if you're interested in signing, go on the website. You have till July 15th to sign your child up to play football. Our Pop Warner season also has flag, which are 7 and 8-year-old children. And also we are doing cheerleading, but we're not doing flag cheerleading. We're doing Mighty Mites, Junior Pee-wees, and we are putting a junior varsity cheer team out there this year. Even though we don't have a junior varsity football team, they are allowed to cheer. They have to cheer for a different level.
This right here is, as I said, I did sign an executive order expanding the outdoor dining footprint for a lot of the businesses to give them basically a fighting chance economically to compete during this pandemic out here. I've spoken with a lot of the business owners. They're very appreciative of being able to do that. We'll see how things go in the fall when the weather transitions out, but I'm encouraging residents to go out and please patronize these businesses out there because if we can keep them around, that's very good economically for our town and good for the residents and good for the business owners. So I'm encouraging people to go out there and patronize all these businesses here that we have that are trying their best to keep open during this pandemic. And as you can see, that there's many of the restaurants that do have outdoor dining here.
We were the first center in the entire county here that had to transition COVID. We've done over 100 COVID patients. You guys were in it. You never left us. You had all the PPE. It was a struggle. Some of you got sick and came back and recuperated. And just the fact that you worked so hard, I think that we want to show you that we appreciate you. So we did invite our mayor, who also knows everything that we've gone through from the beginning.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for all the hard work you did. You don't really appreciate the work that you do until there's a major crisis like this.
Yep.
And I think now, hopefully most folks around the country, not just in this general area of central New Jersey, really truly understand what the professional health workers do. I'm really truly, from the bottom of my heart and from township residents, thank you for all the effort that you put in, because what most people don't realize, they just think, well, that's their job to be there. Well, you know what, you have families too.
Yep.
Thank you, thank you,
Thank you
and
guys.
thank you.
Thank you so much. Round of applause for all of you.
Well, whether rain, sleet, or snow, or pandemic, there's always going to be a Lake Nelson 4th of July parade. But this year was a different twist. It was just a car caravan of several cars going around, decorated. A lot of the residents of Lake Nelson had flags out on their lawns out there and waved while we went by. And given the fact of the circumstances, and obviously we didn't have any festivities down at Byrne Park, which is unfortunate because we had town had renovated Byrne Park out there. We were going to do a ribbon cutting at Byrne Park, but we'll save that for when it's safely. We can have the neighborhood come back out for that. But very surprising. There was a lot of residents out there, and I want to thank them for showing up as some of the participants came by here to celebrate 4th of July, the birth of our country. And as you can see, the caravan going around through the Lake Nelson neighborhoods there. I want to congratulate the class of 2020, Katarina Rodriguez, who is the recipient of the Government Excellence Award, which I had an opportunity to stop by after graduation to present to her in front of her parents and her sister there. She's going to be attending a 4-year school after graduation, and I want to congratulate Mom and Dad there. Job well done for the whole entire Rodriguez family. And this concludes our show, and we're going to close it out with some video of the drive-by high school graduation for the 2020 grads, and also the middle school graduation ceremony that took place down at Piscataway High School.